Welcome back. Striped buttercream cakes seem to be all the rage these days, so I'm going to walk you through all the tips and tricks that you need to know to make your own striped buttercream cake. Now this version is definitely a winter themed cake, but you can use whatever colors you like to match whatever theme you're making your cake for. So this can be done on any type of cake. Here I'm crumb coating my go-to vanilla layer cake recipe, which works great for making layer cakes, but if you have a different recipe you like using, that should work just fine too. It's really important that you do crumb coat the cake because as you're using your icing comb in a minute, you want to make sure all those crumbs are trapped in place. So I've chilled my cake and now I'm adding on a second thicker layer of frosting, and it really is important that you add a generous amount of frosting here. You're going to see that in order to make our grooves we need to have a really thick layer of frosting, and it works best if you smooth it before you start using the icing comb. So I always like to start with my large offset spatula just to get the frosting evenly spread around the cake, and then I use my bench scraper to get it really nice and smooth. And now it's time for the fun part. So I'm using this icing comb here. It's made by Wilton and it came in a set of 3, but there are a ton of different brands out there and any of them should work as long as they have that small square pattern. So as you can see, my first pass around I had a bunch of kind of flyaway bits of frosting. Don't worry about that, just keep going around the cake and make sure that you're keeping the base of your icing comb against your cake board. This is going to make sure you keep creating the grooves in the same place, and that's going to make it a lot easier to get those nice deep grooves. Once you're happy with the way that your grooves look, and I keep calling them grooves just because I really don't know what else to call them, frosting trenches. Once you feel like those are in a good spot, go ahead and take a small offset spatula and smooth out that top bit. And then it's really important that you chill the cake in the freezer for at least 10 minutes. So once your frosting grooves are firm to the touch, you can start adding some colorful frosting in between those grooves. So I'm using small piping bags here, and I'm not actually using a frosting tip, I just cut a small opening at the base of each bag. I decided to make some ombre blue stripes up the side of the cake, but you can use whatever colors you'd like. So you can see the goal is just to really fill the trench entirely, and then you're going to use your bench scraper and scrape away the excess. After your first pass, it might look kind of horrifying like this, but don't worry. The more spins you do, the better your lines are going to look. So as you're doing this, you're applying a decent amount of pressure because you do need to scrape away some excess frosting, which you can see here. And my trick at the end is to run my bench scraper under some hot water and then of course dry it. The heat from the bench scraper will help you scrape away just a tiny bit of frosting, and that's going to give you really perfect looking lines at the end. So if you're struggling or you're working on the finish of the cake, I highly recommend doing that. So once I was happy with the way my stripes looked, I moved on to add one more fun element to this cake. So I'm using a cake stencil here and some thinned out buttercream, and I've secured my stencil in place just using some toothpicks. So this step is totally optional, but it really does help jazz up the cake, and also some of my stripes weren't 100% perfect, so it's always fun adding a little bit more decoration onto the cake so that you're not so focused on just the stripes. Another fun decoration idea for a striped buttercream cake is to add some drips, whether it's a colorful drip or a chocolate ganache drip. I think both would look so gorgeous on this. So I spread out my frosting over my stencil and then I very carefully peeled it back. So my first go wasn't quite as good as my second, but I feel like that's kind of how things always go. So now is the time when I take a step back, I admire what I've done so far, try not to be too critical of myself, and also decide what else I want to do to the cake. So since we had some snowflakes falling, I decided to pipe kind of a cloud border on top of the cake to look like, the snowflakes are delicately falling from the sky. So I piped some various sized mounds on top of the cake, and once they were all in place and in a beautiful ring, I sprinkled a bit of sanding sugar over them to give it a little bit of sparkle. I also patted down the tops of some of the mounds that were a little bit pointy just to make them look a bit more circular and cloud-like. So there are so many different looks you can use this technique with. That's the fun of it, is you really can get creative and the sky is the limit on what you can do. No pun intended. So now it is time to cut into our striped buttercream cake, and of course I'm using a matching blue knife. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful. If you want more details on this process, I've also written a super in-depth blog post on it, and I'll include the link above, so you can head over there and check it out if you want to learn more.